Hello, and thanks for joining me for the first episode of TRP, the Rational Progressive production of the USA Rational Progressive Party. Up today, we are going to talk about the FCC, we're going to talk about ISIS, we're going to talk about SCOTUS, BIBI, and the DHS funding. First up, the FCC just this last week voted to classify ISPs as a public utility. So what does that really mean? So we see a lot of news talking about net neutrality and, oh, they voted for net neutrality, but no one really talks about what's actually happening. What does this actually mean? What did they actually do? Keep in mind at the bottom of this video you can find links for all the sources here, so you can check up on the things that I report here and verify information and participate in discussion below as well in YouTube and on the website. So public utilities. So public utilities like the phone company. If you remember back a few decades ago, phone companies had a big monopoly, and ultimately they're considered a public utility, and they were broken up by the government. And what happens is that they've built this infrastructure for making phone calls, for taking phone calls from one place, from your home to a business or to a friend's home, and now this infrastructure is there, but they don't. But the government doesn't want a monopoly. So now they allow, as a public utility, other companies to come in and use that same infrastructure to sell you phone service. So that's why now we have multiple companies. You can get phone service from AT&T. You can get voice over internet phone service. You can get phone service from various companies. It's not just all one company in one area. So the classifying ISPs, internet service providers, which is like Comcast and AT&T, as public utilities gives the FCC power to enforce net neutrality, which is what everyone's raving about and excited about. So that means that net neutrality means that there's no charging for faster service for one type of data and slowing down another type of data. In other words, if you want to watch Netflix, they can't charge you more because you like to watch more videos. And if you like to download videos, they can't slow down your service because you're always downloading videos. So that's net neutrality in a nutshell. Basically, all data has to be treated the same. Every time you click a link or perform an operation on the internet, it should be treated the same. Your data should flow at the same rate, regardless of whatever you happen to be doing. This became an issue as ISPs, more and more increasingly, trying to attract customers, began selling data plans, unlimited data plans. You can use all the data you want. And then what they were doing is throttling, what they call throttling the internet connection. What that means is, just like a throttle on a car, they let up the gas. So you pay for unlimited data, but they only let you use a certain amount every day, or a certain amount at a certain rate. So in other words, you have unlimited data, but every time you click on a Netflix video, it's buffering, stopping and starting, because they don't want you consuming all the bandwidth, because we all have to share it. Everyone shares their internet bandwidth up to a certain point with the tier 1 network providers. So the ISPs claim that innovation and development will be stifled, but they've been already stalling expansions. A network provider has said that they are deliberately not increasing their capacity and have areas with constant web traffic congestion, all in areas where the ISPs have essentially a monopoly, like the customers don't have another choice. And so wherever they can, wherever there's no competition, the ISPs are not building their networks, they're not upgrading their infrastructure already. They're just maxing out these internet connections, and that doesn't sound that bad. It sounds kind of bad, but they're not only maxing out the internet connections, but they're literally, what happens when you max those connections out is that the service degrades. That's why you can't watch a YouTube video or a Netflix video. The information starts getting discarded by the equipment. So you're trying to send video to your house, and the network is saying, well, that connection is full, that intersection is full, and the intersection just starts throwing away the data or just not taking it at all. And that's what's been happening. And this company is telling us that this is happening in these areas where there's plenty of business, or at least plenty of activity, where they need to upgrade. There's even, they say, and this company's called Level 3, which is a Tier 1 service provider. Basically what they do is they're the service provider. Like Comcast is your service provider, Level 3 is Comcast's service provider. Okay, so they maintain the bigger network that Comcast connects you to. So they're saying that there's even fixes that are relatively inexpensive that these guys aren't even doing. So from Level 3, that leaves the remaining 6 peers. A peer is a service provider that is on the level or that they exchange data with. That leaves the remaining 6 peers with congestion on almost all of the interconnect ports between us. Congestion that is permanent, has been in place for well over a year, and where our peers refuses to augment capacity. They are deliberately harming the service they deliver to their paying customers. They are not allowing us to fulfill the requests their customers make for content. 5 of those congested peers are in the United States and 1 is in Europe. There are none in any other part of the world. All 6 are large broadband consumer networks with a dominant or exclusive market share in their local market. The companies with congested peer interconnects also happen to rank dead last in customer satisfaction across all industries in the United States. Not only dead last, but by a massive statistical margin of almost 3 standard deviations. So there's been a problem. Now, all the crying that these ISPs are doing, there really is only, and most people recognize this, the internet at this point is a public utility. The internet is necessary for everyday life in this country. When you swipe a credit card, it goes over the internet. When your email, how many businesses run on email? All sorts of things happen that require the internet, that it's no longer an option. It's no longer up to just 1 or 2 private companies to decide what happens. We have to make sure, and the FCC has decided that it needs to be regulated, and it needs to be classified in a certain way to enable that regulation to take place. So the only caveat to all this is that, unlike the phone company, the ISPs at this point have an exclusion where they will not be required to let other companies use their network like the phone companies did. So you aren't in the short term going to have a proliferation of small startup internet service providers using Comcast's network or using Verizon's network. So at this point, that's not happening. And as far as this ruling of the previous week, of course, this is probably going to end up in court, and there's already talk of congressmen getting involved and coming up with some kind of law. Of course, Republicans trying to counteract this classification. So stay tuned, and we will see what happens with that. Okay, next up is ISIS, the Islamic State in Syria, the Islamic State of the Levant, the Islamic State in, ISIS, ISIL. According to everyone in the West, this is a big problem. And we've actually even got people leaving the West to go over and fight and join the Islamic State. And they say, I think the number is something like upwards of 10 or 15,000 Western citizens have left the West to join the Islamic State, in that area of the country in the Middle East. So this is kind of a complicated thing. You know, we have sort of a, I guess the U.S. feels sort of responsibility, because what happened is that ISIS has moved into Iraq, and even to the point of Baghdad, which some say they control, some say they don't. But at this point, ideologically, they have a stronghold where the word is now that 8 million people are believed to be living under partial or full IS control. So that's a significant number of people, and they are spread over a significant area of land. And we'll put up a map here. So what is ISIS? Where do they come from? What's happening? What are we going to do about it? You know, we're bombing, and not only that, Iran is a partner with us in trying to stop these people, because basically Iran, Iraq, Syria, they've been fighting against Assad in Syria, and so there are a lot of countries that are concerned about the movement and the caliphate. So basically, a guy named Zarqawi, you might have heard of him from Al Qaeda, and he's dead now. But he's a Jordanian who set up an organization in 2002, and after the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, he pledged allegiance to bin Laden and formed Al Qaeda in Iraq. And in 2006, Al Qaeda in Iraq created an umbrella organization called the Islamic State in Iraq. By 2013, the Islamic State in Iraq was carrying out dozens of attacks a month in Iraq, and they joined the fight against Bashar Assad in Syria. So if you're wondering about Syria and the revolt there, and the whole question a few months ago about should we send them arms, why don't we help the rebels? Well, this is one reason, because this Al-Qaeda splinter is basically one of the main fighting factions, and they're fighting against Assad. Now, Assad may not be a great guy, but we don't want to send arms to people who are later on going to be fighting against us or fighting against our allies. So it's a tough situation. In April 2013, the forces in Iraq and Syria, and the creation of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIS. So basically, that's when it came about, was almost 2 years ago. All these factions out of Iraq and Syria joined forces, and the whole point is to create a caliphate, Islamic State, which is under one religious ruler. In 2014 June, ISIS overran Mosul, and they advanced south towards Baghdad. After consolidating a hold over dozens of cities and towns, ISIS declared the creation of the caliphate and changed its name to Islamic State. They are reported to have $2 billion in cash and assets, making it the world's wealthiest militant group. So originally it came from individual donations, like if you know, Osama bin Laden was wealthy, so a lot of money for Al-Qaeda came from him initially. But now at this point, they control oil and gas fields, they levy taxes and tolls, and they're smuggling, extortion, and kidnapping. If you see these executions, that's what these executions are all about. You know, give us money or we're going to cut off someone's head. And that's why the United States has a policy that we will not negotiate, because what will happen if we pay someone a couple $1 million, you know, they're just going to keep grabbing every American they can. And they're still kidnapping people here and there, but that's a huge source of income. Not as much as oil these days, which they control. And also, after they took over a lot of these cities, they gained control of banks that were in these cities and financial institutions, and now they control the cash that those institutions held. So what are we doing now, and what's going on? Well, so yeah, the Middle East is, has a long history of peace, right? Not really. So I think the United States feels a sense of obligation, because what is happening is they're moving into Iraq, and since we destabilized Iraq by invading and removing its ruler, its head, we have a sense of responsibility to prevent them from falling under this strict Islamic regime, which adheres to a extreme Sunni Islam point of view, and they have harsh retribution, beheadings, crucifixions, stonings, whippings, amputations, the whole ball of wax. And then you see their, part of Islam, which is also an extension of Christianity, by the way, is an attitude against what could be considered idols. So that's why you see, idols leading to false gods, false prophets, and that's why you see them destroying historical pieces of art, historical things in museums and that kind of thing, because they view it as idolatry and as something that takes away, that distracts, that entices people away from Islam and from God. So a lot of the countries, including Iran, the United States, people have jumped on this and gone to bombing and sort of dropping bombs and trying to stop the advance of these people, which supposedly they have maybe 35,000 fighters in their military. The thing is, let's get real. Bombing is not going to stop this. If you look at this map we put up again. If you look at this map, the way they're spread out and the way the terrain is, you're not going to be able to stop all these people. They're intertwined. They're running the government. They're not really, whatever form of government it is, they're taking taxes. They're mixed with the people. You can't stop them unless they have a concerted attack on one town. So unless we put boots on the ground, and no one wants to say it, unless there is a armed, hand-to-hand, gun-to-gun fight, these people are going to be there for decades. And that's just the way it is. Now, if you ask me, we've made a lot of mistakes in dealing with terror and dealing with extremism. Now, number one, because there's something called the strength of weak networks. Okay, so in other words, say you have a really strong electrical wire that's supplying power to a light. Okay, well, once you cut that one strong wire, the light can't get any more power. But if you have a lot of little wires going to one light, and they all are in series or in parallel, then you can cut one of those wires and the light can still get electricity. So when you have a leader like Osama bin Laden, or you have a Zarqawi, then it's pretty easy for us to see what's happening, what's going on, where that person is, how they're communicating, what kind of actions are being taken and the repercussions. But when you keep killing the leaders of these groups, then you end up with fewer and fewer heads, and you end up spreading this thing. It's like cutting into cancer cells and getting it into the bloodstream. So it's just something that we have to really think about, a different approach to dealing with this situation. How much of a situation is it? How much is it? Saddam Hussein was not a good guy. Bashar Assad was not a good guy, but they stabilized their countries. You got rid of Saddam Hussein, and look what happened. You have Sunni and Shia fighting. They can't even govern, and then in comes the Islamic State, and now they're taking over. And things are, more barbaric than ever. So that's something to really think about But bombing, I tell you, is just not going to be the answer. The big question I have about anything like this, when we have an ideological difference with the way someone, for example, you take a North Korea, the way they run their government, is the number one question for me is, can the people leave? And if they leave, do they have somewhere to go? So, can the people leave the Islamic State, and do they have somewhere to go? Which brings us to the huge refugee problem in the Middle East. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people displaced, nowhere to go, living in tents, living with next to nothing. So that's a whole other issue, and that's something to think about too whenever the United States engages in armed conflict. So we'll be talking more about refugees in another episode, but that's just a little brief on ISIS, and really something we should think about in terms of what we're going to do. And just dropping bombs, let me tell you, is not going to do anything. Nothing. It's just maybe makes a few people feel good here and causes some misery there. And that's about it. All right? Next up is SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. They're in session right now, and there are oral arguments in 5 cases this week. So they are the right of accused to confront their accusers in court, the right of the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission, an independent commission, to control redistricting for voting, exclusive of the legislature. So the legislature is upset that they are excluded by the Arizona Constitution from controlling the redistricting process, and they are challenging this in court. A case involving adjudication on the merits, which is part of the U.S. Code, and of course, the big one that everyone's talking about is IRS credits for coverage purchased on federal exchanges for those under the Affordable Care Act, for those purchasing health care insurance. The question is, can the IRS legally give those subsidies? So, as far as I can see, this challenge, from everything I've heard, is questionable, number one, in the plaintiffs, number two, in its merits. It seems to be kind of grasping at straws and kind of esoteric, and pretty much I think it'll come down that it's already sort of been decided a little bit in the previous case. Yes, the IRS has the authority to do this sort of things. Unless you're going to say that, the Supreme Court's given the IRS pretty broad leeway in terms of executing its duties under the Constitution. I really don't see this getting turned over or sent back, but you never know what's going to happen. So we'll keep an eye on that, and this all happens Wednesday, and and then the oral arguments happen Wednesday, and then we'll see what happens when the decision comes down. And BIBI, Netanyahu from Israel, the Republicans invited him to come speak to Congress, and there was a little bit of a dust-up, a hullabaloo, a little bit of some angst about them, the Republicans not consulting the White House before inviting another head of state, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, you invite a head of state and you don't tell the president. It really is kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. At the same time, who really cares? This guy wants to come and tell us about how we're making a bad decision in terms of how we're dealing with Iran and its nuclear program. And essentially, it's just an opportunity for the Republicans and Netanyahu to just stick their thumb in President Obama's eye, and that's what it's all about. Because otherwise, really, what's the point? We're not going to make our own decision. We're going to let BIBI decide for us what we're going to do with Iran. We're going to let BIBI tell us what's best for us. It really makes no sense. He has nothing to offer. You might want to say, well, a head of state's perspective is good. There's nothing wrong with getting that. And I agree with that, except that it's all going to be rhetoric, 100% guaranteed. Because why? How do we know this? Because the military has come out and said that this guy does not know what he's talking about. His own military does not agree with him. So they're saying what he's doing is actually probably going to set things back. And it comes down to this, really. Logically, let's look at it. First of all, no one wants any country to have nuclear weapons or develop a new nuclear weapon program. It's just, no one wants to have that happen. Oddly enough, the United States are the only ones to ever use nuclear weapons, and we still have them. But regardless of that, we don't want any more nuclear weapons. We want to get rid of the ones we have. Well, there's only two ways to ensure that happens, and that is either one, if a country decides they want to have nuclear weapons, there's only two ways to prevent them from getting them, Iran or anybody else. One is go to war and destroy that government and completely change their priorities so that they don't have the resources or the will to develop nuclear weapons, which is a huge war, if you think about it. And two is with their cooperation. Well, the United States policy at this point is try to gain their cooperation. Now, Netanyahu, old BIBI, is saying that he doesn't want any residual nuclear program at all. And while Iran is saying our current program is for peaceful purposes only, energy, research, that sort of thing. Well, come on, are you going to tell people that they can't research nuclear science? This just doesn't make any sense. And are we going to enforce that all over the world? Is Israel going to tell us to enforce that all over the world? Are they going to say that to, who's next? So the whole thing is just really about getting a jab in at Obama and trying to say that, he's screwing up again. When in reality, he's doing the best thing possible. We're gaining cooperation with Iran. Relations with Iran have been improving steadily, which is a good thing. I don't think anyone can say it's not a good thing. They're working with us against ISIS. They are cooperating with us up to this point with negotiations and with trying to come to some agreement on their nuclear program. So why poke the bear? Why throw gas on the fire? So let BB come, let him say whatever he's got to say, but in the end, the United States will make policy based on its own needs for its own purposes, and that's exactly the way it should be. Finally, we have DHS funding, Department of Homeland Security. So you probably heard the Republicans once again brought us to the brink of government shutdown. This time, ironically, you would think it wouldn't be so, but with the Department of Homeland Security. In case you don't know, the House of Representatives are the ones that decide how the government gets to spend money. They decide how much, what they get to spend it on. So basically, every dollar is accounted for by law, by a bill coming out of the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, that authorizes the federal government to spend money on things. And then that bill goes to the Senate, which votes in agreement, and then it goes to the president and he signs it. Well, the Republicans, being the ideologues they are, and the Obama deranged haters that they are, could not put forward a clean bill. What's a clean bill? A clean bill is a bill that is only in regards to the thing it's professed to be about. So in other words, if it's Department of Homeland Security funding, operations money, that's what the bill is about. Well, what they did was they're mad about his executive actions on immigration, President Obama's actions on immigration, so they attached an amendment to the bill that tries to block what he's doing in terms of immigration enforcement, which is entirely within his power and authority. He's the chief administrator of the United States. He's responsible for how the government operates, how it executes its enforcement of laws, and how it executes the administration of all its various agencies. That's his job. He's the president of the United States. Well, they don't like what he's done, and so instead of just protecting and making certain that the American citizen is protected and safe, they decide to play games and brinksmanship with this ideological aspect, ideological amendment. Well, Democrats didn't go along with it. They couldn't get the Senate to vote for it. And ironically, Boehner, the leader of the House of Representatives, a Republican, wanted to wait until after the SCOTUS decision we were just talking about to see what happens. That he wanted to have like a 3-week or a month funding, and then they could revisit the funding after they decide what happens with the ACA and the IRS. Well, his own party, his own lunatic fringe wouldn't go along with it. So they ended up trying to force through this amendment blocking the executive action, and it didn't happen. So it came down to the wire. The funding was going to run out, I think, Friday at midnight or Saturday at midnight, and they ended up passing a 1-week extension. So now next week we may be in the same situation, although the word on the street is that there's already an understanding that next week there will be a clean bill put forward for a vote, which should pass as far as I can tell. As far as what I hear from the various members of Congress, it should be able to pass. However, as soon as that sort of word went out, we have a few Republicans here and there crying that there is no deal, we don't know what's going to happen, and of course others still saying we want to do something about immigration and we want to do it now. Well, who knows? These guys are just kind of nutty, and who knows what's going to happen. My prediction right now is we are 70-80% going to have a clean bill, supposedly funding the Department of Homeland Security for the next year. But stay tuned, we'll see what happens. And that is it for this episode of TRP, the Rational Progressive, production of the USA Rational Progressive Party. Thank you for joining me, and I hope it was informative, and we hope to see you next time. Take care.